Hey everyone, it's Jonathan and welcome back to Every Version Ever. Today Nicki and I are back to talk about another film from the Asylum, Grimm's Snow White, or as I've called it in my head ever since I discovered it, the Asylum's Snow White, because there is almost nothing related to the Brothers Grimm in this movie. I'd had the Asylum Sleeping Beauty on my list to cover for the podcast for ages, but I'd had no idea that they'd done other fairy tales until I started researching for the podcast. As soon as I discovered a Snow White film, I knew I had to add it to my lineup, but there are others, and at some point Nicki and I will probably have to do those as well, including a couple movies in their attempts at a franchise called Avengers Grimm, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Anyway, that will probably be way down the line. Today we're talking about the Asylum's take on Snow White, but also kind of Lord of the Rings. Not really, but I don't know. It really seems like they wanted to do Lord of the Rings with this one, not Snow White. So I guess this movie was released to capitalize off of Snow White and the Huntsman and Mirror Mirror, which I remember those coming out at the same time. I don't remember if I've seen both of those. I think I saw Snow White and the Huntsman, but I don't remember much of it. I think I was bored. I don't remember. I feel like I watched it, but I don't remember it, and I don't remember if I saw Mirror Mirror or not.
I think Snow White and the Huntsman was Charlize Theron as the evil queen. And then Mirror Mirror, I believe was not Sandra Bullock. Was it Julie Roberts? Who was
That
it?
sounds right, but I don't remember for sure.
Because I remember I had to choose which one I was going to go to because I only had time for one. And I went and saw Snow White and the Huntsman.
Do you remember watching it? Because I don't remember much of the
I do
plot.
actually.
Was it
And
good?
it
Was I just checked out?
No, it wasn't terrible by any stretch. It kind of runs into the same thing that the new one coming out is going to run into. Like, you had your dwarves, but I think they were just guys at that point. But it was Kristen Stewart was Snow White,
Hmm.
which was its own thing. Chris Helmsworth was the huntsman, and I think those two fell in love. I really liked it because I thought Chris Helmsworth was hot, which, obviously he is. Charlize Theron was a really solid evil queen, though, in my remembrance.
The only thing I remember is like, didn't she send out crows at some point?
Yeah, she had the power to basically become a crow, I think, too. So she's kind of like a shapeshifter. Like, her powers were
Okay.
pretty significant. And then Mirror Mirror was, I believe, Lily Collins and let me look here.
At some point, these should be on my list. I haven't really added enough Snow White, so maybe I should add these to my list.
All right, so it's Julia Roberts and Lily Collins were Queen and Snow White, and then Arnie Hammer was like your Prince Charming type. I think Mirror Mirror was more kind of like Enchanted, like not quite as whimsical, but sort of in that realm.
Okay.
So it was Snow White and the Huntsman was a lot more, I guess, quote serious, where Mirror Mirror was a little bit more, well, a comedy adventure. So yeah, it was more fun.
Okay. Yeah, I should add them to my list. I should see those because like I said, I feel like I saw Snow White and the Huntsman, but I don't remember it. And didn't they make a sequel?
Did they? I will let you know in a second.
Which, if they did, I never saw the sequel.
Oh, yeah. Winter War.
Okay.
So yeah, you had wow. Yeah, Charlize Theron, a good chunk of the original cast. I'll have to go check that out.
Maybe we could do them for the podcast at some point. Probably the next few months. I think we'll have plenty of time. I think this Princess series is going to be a long one.
Well, considering how many versions, I mean, even just like old school.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like Emily Blunt was a character called Freya. It looks like she's kind of a like frost queen thing person.
Hmm.
Billed is both a prequel and a sequel to Snow White and the Huntsman. Okay.
I guess we'll find out at some point.
Yes, that we will. That's not just a threat, that's a promise.
Well, I guess we should talk about this version of Snow White.
But I'd rather talk about Snow White and the Huntsman or Mirror Mirror.
We'll get to those.
Yay!
I feel like I'm probably going to do it more than once, but I almost feel like I have to compare this to Sleeping Beauty from the Asylum.
I was doing that too.
Which do you think was better? Did you like this one better or Sleeping Beauty?
I'm kind of two minds. I appreciate the scope that this one was aiming for. The world felt bigger. It felt more thought out.
Hmm.
I'm not sure it's a better movie.
I kind of feel the same way because as far as rewatchability goes, I feel like this has more, but I don't know. Like they both have their pluses and minuses.
Yeah. Like I feel like they did more with the stuff. They looked at it and went, okay, here's the base story, what can we do bigger? It felt more centered around Snow White, which again, to some extent, where you have a character that sleeps all the time, there's only so much you can do in that respect.
Yeah.
It felt that said, it did feel longer. Like
It did. It was a little bit longer, but not that much longer.
right. It felt like a 2 hour movie, whereas The Sleeping Beauty felt more its normal length.
Hmm.
The Queen again with the Queen, I didn't get as evil as I think they could have gone. It felt kind of pedestrian that way. The prince was more preferable, obviously, because he wasn't just a terrible person.
I think that's why I liked this a little bit more, maybe, was I liked the prince and princess better than the previous prince and
Yeah.
princess.
Yeah. Plus, there was something they gave you reasons to care about the characters a little bit more.
Yes. And the other one did not.
No, I agree. And some of the characters in this felt like they brought them in and then they didn't do anything with them. Like there was a
Hmm.
lot more characters that just did nothing, I felt like.
Yeah. Like, I don't know how many elves there were because they'd used elves instead of dwarves in this movie. Like, I think there were more than seven, but if either way, they didn't do a whole lot with any of them except for like three. Like, there were three that I, I think that I have names for in my notes. The rest of them, I don't know what their names were. If they said, I forgot.
Right. Well, and even with like the I can't remember what his actual name was, but they called him Runt. Like even like kind of the one that was half human, half elf.
Yeah, I wrote his name down because like I had a whole thing with his name because I Hagthorn. Yeah, I had to write his name down because she said, "Ah, a noble and sturdy plant," and I was like, "What?" So I looked up Hagthorn, and it's actually another name for the hawthorn plant.
Oh.
And but in England, they call it the Mayflower, which is where the Pilgrim ship got its name.
Oh, well, there
So
you
that was
go. You learned
interesting.
something new. Yeah, very much. But even with him, like, I was expecting because he was the runt and because he kind of had something to gain or something to prove, I thought that there was going to be more with that. And I don't have it in the same way because that was more my own building up the expectations on it than, us, like the people behind this doing it.
Hmm.
But I just, with all of them, they could have done a lot with it, but they didn't really do a lot with it.
Yeah, in that respect, I felt this is very much on par with the Sleeping Beauty. Like there was so many missed opportunities. I feel like they got to more of the opportunities, but there was still a lot that they missed.
Did you see that the main elf was named Orlando?
Yes, I wrote that down because I was like, well, first of all, at the beginning, they had the whole thing about long ago, a star fell from the heavens and it was the ultimate source of power known as the Viridian Flame. And then, like, something about reptilian beasts come out to defend it. And then there's these elves, and the elves all have these amulets that contain the flame. I was like, I thought this was a Snow White ripoff. Now it's a Lord of the Rings ripoff, too. And then they had an elf named Orlando, and I was like, okay, they're leaning into the Lord of the Rings thing. But then they kind of didn't anymore after that.
Yeah, they kind of it was like the first 20 minutes were one movie and then everything else was something else entirely.
Yeah.
Like I thought when they were talking about the return of the flame, I thought for sure that it was going to be Hagthorn that kind of played into that. Like, found his destiny and did the thing and helped save the day. And it was just like it's just another elf.
Half elf.
But again, I was putting those expectations out there. The movie really didn't specifically say anything one way or the other in that respect.
Yeah.
But again, too, like with stuff like that, it definitely like it would having a little bit of background as to what the amulets were, how they worked, and it was a nice way for them to kind of describe the queen's power.
Hmm.
But there are easier ways to have done that without that didn't take as long to describe.
Is probably another thing, padding for time. They could have told, or maybe some of it they did tell in the dialogue. I feel like they could have rewritten a bit of the dialogue and got all this info into the movie in other ways.
Yeah. But exposition is always going to be the easiest way to do it. And as we discussed with Sleeping Beauty, whether because of timing or money or inexperience or just straight up, it was easier, the whole padding thing was just something that a lot of these movies do.
Hmm. And that this whole part of the beginning did feel a bit like padding because you had like this voiceover is talking about the elves decided to remain hidden, and some went in and lived with the humans in hopes of a better life. But humans began to enslave the elves and exploit their gifts. And then you get a weird shot of this guy chained up on a wall. It looks like he's in somebody's house, and there's another guy just clubbing him in the stomach. I was like, is this supposed to be exploiting his gifts?
Right.
That didn't make any sense. But also the picture was kind of blurry. Like right before the clubbing started, it kind of went blurry, and I was like, did they think the clubbing was going to be too graphic? Like the Asylum has shown way worse things.
Oh yeah.
Like cheesily done, bad special effects, worse things, but still worse things than a guy getting bashed in the stomach with a club.
Yeah. And it's hard to know. It could have just been there's a couple of shots in this movie where you go, okay, what were you doing with this shot? But we'll talk about it when we talk about it.
There was also some stuff in this voiceover about, like, talking about the great prophecy and telling of a mighty luminary who will rise in an era of great turmoil. This is where our story begins. And I was like, okay, well, somebody got a new thesaurus and wanted to show off a bit.
The time and place thing, John.
And then we've got this group of people, I guess, hunting. One guy who looks like he's royalty, and then the other two looking like maybe one's a knight and one's a squire. But the squire, I think, was a girl, and then they're attacked by what seems to be a dragon, and the one guy who I thought was the knight runs away after the girl gets chomped and thrown, and then the guy who looks like he's royalty presumably goes to fight it, but he does nothing but stand there and let it eat him.
Oh, so they're following the stand still and hope that nothing bad happens defense.
There's a bunch of scenes in this movie like that where somebody just like stands and waits to die.
Yeah.
Well, there was in Sleeping Beauty too, so maybe this is just an Asylum thing.
I'm thinking it's just part of the Asylum playbook.
I did think it was interesting that the first person to die was a girl, because like you don't usually get that. Like Jurassic Park pretty much always avoids showing women and kids getting hurt, which always seemed weird to me. But then someday we'll talk about Jurassic World, but it seemed like they overcorrected with the horrifying way they decided to kill off the one lady in that, that one. Anyways, what were you going to say?
And again, it's kind of like Gruner. The death did not match the person, and in most of these movies, the death's gonna match the person.
Yeah, the way these creatures worked, I was confused. Like they didn't ever seem to eat people. Like it was like they chomped and threw. Like I said the guy that the king looking guy was eaten. He was not eaten. It showed the dragon, monster, lizard, whatever, biting down on the camera, so it was like from his point of view. But then you see him like for his funeral, so they had a body. It didn't eat him.
Well, it's like, you know how cats don't like necessarily eat their prey. Like they'll sit there and play with it and like kill it, and then they'll leave it on your back porch. I mean, these guys are just glorified cats, really.
I guess so. Like they're not even, like it said they were born out of the Viridian flame thing, so I guess they're not mortal. But then are the elves mortal? I don't know. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Again, I'm thinking way too much more about this than they thought about when they wrote it.
Absolutely. Well, and there's so much stuff that's brought up, and then it's never paid off. It's never discussed again. It's like when you have there's that one great power that the one guy has and uses it once, and then it's never spoken of. Nothing is ever done with it. It's just, it's like it never occurred.
Yeah. But then after this scene, we cut to a shot of a woman who is dressed all in black tulle and feathers, crying, repeating, "It simply cannot be true. How is it possible?" And like, there's no one around, but it turns out she's just practicing her response to bad news. Because this is the evil queen. And then you infer from that, the royal must have been her husband, so that's the king, and presumably the father of Snow White.
Yes.
And yes, she immediately stops crying and then does the whole mirror thing to talk to her bad CGI mirror man to make sure she's the fairest of them all.
Yeah. I did like the water effect, but it was so badly done.
And then she calls to her servant, who is an elf, to ask about the prince from the neighboring kingdom who is supposed to be on his way. And then she asks the elf about the flame, and the elf says that it's only a myth. And then we have a scene where the prince finds someone hunting the the giant dragon beast, whatever's on his land by order of the queen. And he says something about it hasn't been a day since the king's death and they're already violating their treaty. So then I guess his idea to stop this is to marry her. It's like literally the day after her husband dies, she starts doing evil stuff, and you're like, whoopsie, well, I got the only way we can solve this is to marry her.
There's a couple of times that happens. So, because he like asks her for her hand in marriage the day of the funeral, and it's like, okay, even from a decorum perspective, what are you doing? You know?
The like I do like this prince better than the previous one, but at some points he is not the brightest bulb.
No, he is quite lacking in the common sense department.
Yeah. So he goes to the funeral for the king in the kingdom of White Vale and sees Snow White, who is presumably the White Vale thing is their family name. That's where the Snow White comes from in this version.
I was surprised to see her as a blonde.
It, I guess it's too much Disney influence because, like, in my head, Snow White has black hair, but that's because the Disney version had black hair. Like, I don't think it has to be that way. It's just we're so used to it because of Disney.
Well, and that was probably one of the. Are there earlier versions of Snow White?
Like film versions?
Like movie? Yeah, film versions.
Probably.
And I'm not asking you to look, but like just ones that you've run across.
Snow White is the most recent addition to this lineup, so I haven't really thought about too many Snow White versions that I'm going to add yet. So I haven't looked too much. I feel like I saw something about a silent film, but I don't know what the year was. I need to look to find out to make sure.
Well, and the other thing with that is not that you can't like some. I mean, obviously there is a difference the way that brunette hair translates to black and white versus blonde. But even with that, you could speculate a lot of colors in black and white too.
Yeah. Anyways, the prince sees Snow White, and you can tell he's like entranced by her. But then he goes and proposes to the queen anyway. Like, okay, whatever. And then the queen acts like she's offended that he would propose at her husband's funeral, but she invites him to stay anyway so that they can talk about it. And then Snow White comes in, and the queen starts getting jealous because they're noticing each other. So she goes back to ask the mirror again if she's the fairest, and now the mirror says Snow White is the fairest. And she gets mad. And they mentioned that Snow White had been away visiting a convent, but she had not yet felt the calling. So then my first thought was like, can the mirror not see outside of the kingdom? Like, I want to know why the mirror's range.
Yeah, I think the mirror was kind of vindictive.
The mirror is pretty much only a plot device. He does not make sense.
No.
But then that night we see Snow White and the prince talking, and we learn that she apparently lived at the convent ever since she was a little girl. The queen married her father and sent her away right away. And I was like, wow, that's a great father.
Yeah. Well, you know, when you're in love with an evil queen.
I suppose it sort of makes sense because you learn later that she has some sort of a magic power over men. So I guess I can buy that he was brainwashed. But there's a lot of things with the motivations of people that in hindsight don't make a lot of sense because, like, at this point, Snow White seems to be okay with the queen. Like, she's planning to go back to live at the convent and just let the queen have the kingdom. But then later she talks like she'd always known that the queen had a spell over her father, which that did not make sense to me.
No. Well, and again, like you say, there's a lot of that kind of stuff that goes down here. And even like the scope of the queen's powers are so like she has to use the entire thing of elf crystals to be able to conjure the mirror. And she doesn't seem like she has all that much power outside of those like the crystals she has, there's not a lot of power in them.
Yeah, that's true. Again, with her power, it wasn't fully clear what was her power and what was power that she was taking from someone else. Because, like, they act like she has power over men, but did she need a crystal for that? Because she can't do the transformation thing. She can't, the elf has to do that for her. So, like, it doesn't matter that much, but it just wasn't super clear.
Yeah, the way it played, I kind of assumed that all of her power came from the elves.
I guess we don't need to see like the crystal glowing as she's like staring into the person's eyes to make them obey her.
Right.
So Snow White and the prince are talking, and she tells him that she used to love the forests of White Vale, but now they're barren because the queen got rid of the elves. And he tells her that they still have magic forests where he lives, and all the elves and creatures are still there. And then he repeats all the stuff from the voiceover that so we could have cut the voiceover. He talks about the prophecy of the mighty luminary and then adds that this luminary will unite all creatures for 1,000 years of harmony. And it's like, okay, well, I think we know where this is going. So then he invites her to go for a walk with him tomorrow at noon, and he gives her his mother's ring as a token of his great esteem. And of course, the queen is watching from her castle, and she I think it's implying that there's an affair happening with the guy who was with her husband at the beginning because he's like in a bed and she wakes him up and she says, "You did such a great job with the king. I've got another task for you." Like she's wanting him to go kill Snow White. This is the huntsman. I didn't realize that this was the huntsman right away.
Oh no, I didn't know either. He looks too fancily dressed to be what you would traditionally consider to be a huntsman.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it makes sense because he was with the king and they were doing like a hunting party, but it wasn't clear until he was called the huntsman later.
Right. True. Another thing too with the ring, like so the ring that the prince gave to Snow White was also the ring that he proposed to the queen with.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
So that whole thing was like, okay, so you're not proposing to the prince or to Snow White, but you're giving her this ring that means so much to you because you're fond of her. I was so confused.
Yeah, that does make sense. I I guess I didn't even think about the fact that it's the same ring and he just randomly gave it to her as a token of his great esteem. But that was supposed to
Right.
be, if that was supposed to be the engagement ring, yeah, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I assume so because he's holding the ring. I thought he was holding the ring when he went to see the queen.
I think so. I think you're right. Anyway, the next day, she's acting all concerned that Snow White is going to like upset her father's memory or something if she squanders her virtue with the prince. But Snow White is like, I would never. And then she's going to go back to the convent immediately.
And that whole bit is so strange. Like I can see, the queen saying, "Hey, you know what? This isn't the life for you. I think you need to go back yonder." Great. But the way that she responds to it is just really odd.
Yeah, but I was also wondering, like, why is the rest of the kingdom okay with this situation? Because, like, Snow White she's the legitimate heir to the throne. Like, is there a country that would have a situation where if the king died, the queen would take over and she would be the first in line for the throne and not his blood-related children? Because this seems like something that people would go to war over.
Yeah. But I imagine one, it was probably done for convenience, and two, in theory, you could have different, royal, ways of royalty things going the way that they go. Because in theory, Snow White was still underage, so even if she wasn't queen per se, she would still have a steward
I I
until she was
guess
of age.
so. Yeah, yeah, I guess it makes sense.
Kinda.
But it still seems weird that nobody in the kingdom would say anything. Like this feels weird that they've just sent the princess off to become a nun so that the queen can take over. It feels odd.
Well, and I'm trying to think with the original and again it's Disney's Snow White that I'm going to, but she really didn't, and I know we didn't get a lot with her at the beginning, but she wasn't really in the castle either. Like there was not a lot of like back and forth between her and the queen. Was there? It's been so long since I've seen it.
Not really. It's been a while since I watched that one too, but the I don't think it was ever fully explained the full relationship as to who was royal and who was marrying into it and whatever.
Well, and the way that Snow White was dressed at the beginning was very plain. She wasn't dressed like a princess.
No, and she was scrubbing the stairs, so it was like a Cinderella situation where she was a servant basically.
Yeah. So it could have been too where maybe the princess wasn't well known, or maybe her presence wasn't well remembered or known, which you'd have a hard time believing it, but
It could be because they sent her away when she was a little kid, so maybe.
yeah. I don't know. I like you said, we're spending a lot more time on it than any of them are,
Yeah,
but
yeah. Anyways, at this point, Snow White's on her way out, and the queen tells her huntsman that he should leave her body for the beast, but bring her her heart. And she says this like in full earshot of the other servants, and I was like, do the other servants know about this? Do they know she's evil? And I guess so, because the other guy like helps knock her out and steals the ring. So I guess the other servants are in on this evil plan.
well, and if they're under the power of the queen as well,
Yeah, I I guess thinking back on it, because at this point we didn't know that she has power over men. Like that wasn't something that was revealed until later in the movie.
Yeah.
There was a lot of things where they would reveal something and it would be like, okay, sure. Which I guess that happened in Sleeping Beauty too.
Also, if you did you see the front cover of, I guess, the poster or the DVD or whatever?
I probably did, but I don't remember what it looked like.
This queen is not that queen.
Oh wow. That is that is a completely different character. And those
Yes.
are completely different monsters. I guess they
Yes.
vaguely resemble they resemble the monsters more closely than the dragon from the Sleeping Beauty poster. But yeah, that is all incorrect.
Yes.
Strange. Whatever. Doesn't matter.
Very.
I mean, it matters, but it doesn't matter. Anyways, the one guy that's not the huntsman helps knock her out, and then they get attacked by a beast, and the beast grabs him and kills him, but he doesn't eat him. But this is another instance where he's basically just staring up at the thing, screaming, not even trying to save himself. And then again, this is bizarre behavior to me, but whatever. The huntsman goes to the other guy and cuts his heart out super easily, barely an inconvenience.
You've got a really sharp knife.
Yeah, just right through the ribs. Didn't take any time at all.
Well, knives back in the day were just built differently.
I guess so. It's like the beast is still there. Why are you stopping to take this guy's heart before you run away? Eh, Whatever. And also, like, why didn't he take Snow White's heart? Like, it's. I think they're supposed to be implying that he's not actually evil because, like, you find out later that he had a son. But like, whatever. It doesn't matter. Whatever. This is what
Well, I think
happened.
they're going by, yeah, I think they're probably going by what happened with, like, in the original story, I would
That's
imagine.
true. Yeah. But up until this point, you just assume that this guy's evil because he seems
Right.
pretty
And,
eager to kill her.
and maybe getting away from the queen, like maybe she has range on how far out her evil extends.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, I don't know. The magic is not the rules of the magic is not very clear.
Oh, it absolutely isn't.
Anyway, he takes this guy's heart back to the queen and she feeds it to her pet dogs. But are they dogs? They look like
I assume they were hellhounds,
well
really.
that I wondered, but they looked like badly rendered hyenas from like an N64 game.
Also true. Yeah, so badly rendered hellhound hyenas or hell hyenas. I suppose
Yeah,
that's probably a better way to say them.
something like that.
Yeah.
But then we go back to the prince, and he's telling his servant that now he's decided to marry for love. And thank goodness the queen refused his proposal because the fates had another in mind for him. And his servant is like, but sire, it wasn't a complete refusal.
I laughed at that.
And then they come to the queen, who is crying on her balcony, and he goes outside, and we stay in there with the servant, watching as the queen and prince mime her breaking the bad news to Snow White, or that Snow White is dead. It's like, this is an odd choice, but okay, whatever, doesn't matter. And it comes back inside and says, my love has been taken, and they leave.
And he kind of does the telenovela, the dramatic kind of, oh, my love has died. Ah.
Yeah, something like that.
Which, understandably, love of your life that you just met this morning, sure.
And I guess I didn't mention it, but when Snow White was about to be murdered, there were two elves in the forest watching, and they did some sort of a magic thing, and one disappeared, but the other didn't. And like, this isn't what happened, but the way it was set up, the one disappeared and then the monster showed up. I was like, is that supposed to be that the one elf is the monster?
That's initially what I thought too, but I think that the second elf was the one that's half human, so he can't do that.
I thought about that later, but it was not clear at this point.
No, it really wasn't.
But anyways, they take Snow White to be healed by another elf named Mara, and this is where he's like, "Can you heal her before Orlando returns?" And I was like, "Okay, well, we're leaning into the Lord of the Rings thing." And at that point, I was like, "How much you want to bet that Orlando is going to be the spitting image of Orlando Bloom?" He wasn't, but That would have been funny if they had done that.
Oh, it would have been hilarious. Like having a horror movie character called Stephen King. Did you notice their ears?
Yes.
The
Oh,
elves'
they were
ears.
terrible.
Oh, oh, it's like they weren't even like,
Some of
a
them,
little
some of
bit
them
of
were like
makeup.
peeling off.
Yeah, and the thing is, a little makeup just to blend goes a long way.
Yeah, like if the light hit the ear right, you could see the real ear inside the fake plastic ear. Some of the ears were peeling off. The ears were like as bad as the CGI was. I could forgive that if that's all they had. They didn't even try with the ears. They just bought some plastic ears at Dollar Tree and put them on
Yeah.
them. That was not a
The
good
full
choice.
Spock ear that would go over top of your ear would be more realistic than what they had for that.
Yeah, they did not do a good job with the ears.
No.
But then Orlando comes back and he wants to kill Snow White because she's a human. And then he reveals that the one elf is actually a half human. And it's like he's prejudiced against the half human elf or something.
While they themselves are getting prejudiced against.
Yeah. So they don't let him kill her, and they tell him that she'll be gone as soon as she gets better. So then we go back to the queen, and she's monologuing to her elven servant about her plans to marry the prince and find the source of the elven magic to keep it for herself. And I was like, why is she telling her poor downtrodden elf servant everything? It's like it's kind of obvious they're setting up this elf servant to betray the queen, and you'd think the queen would know better.
That's asking for too much in that particular aspect. One of the other things that once we find out that Snow White had died, so the prince went to the queen at the king's funeral and says, "Hey, you wanna hook up?" And then the prince's servant suggested the queen wouldn't wait forever, a day after Snow White had died,
Mm-hmm.
to wait for him to propose. And it's like that it's literally, her body's not even cold yet. I'm pretty sure she'll be okay. She's not gonna go, jump in bed with the first guy she runs across, or jump at the first marriage proposal.
Yeah, this servant, I had questions about. We find something out about him later. I was like, it seemed to come out of nowhere, but then I was thinking back to these scenes and I was like, you know what? I think they were actually setting that up. They didn't do it well,
Yeah.
but they tried, and I have to give them props for that.
Yeah, I was in that same boat with that, because it's just like, okay, there's more to this guy. There has to be.
Yes. So then she calls on her mirror again and she finds out Snow White is still fairer than she is. And then I was like, what is the proximity of this mirror? Like, you couldn't see her when she was at the convent, which is close enough that she could get home for her father's funeral right after he died. But now she's in the next kingdom over being cared for by the elves, and the mirror can see her.
That, or the Snow White is prettier dead than the queen is alive.
I was like, maybe the convent had some sort of magic dampening shield that hid it away from magical spying objects.
That, or the power of God overcomes the power of elves.
Sure, that makes sense. We'll go with that. Anyways, now she wants the huntsman dead because he didn't kill her. And somehow he knows that she's going to kill him because he runs to Wally. And I was like, did we know who Wally was beforehand? I don't think so. This is a
No.
brand new person named Wally that he runs to, gives him the ring that he stole off Snow White, and tells him to run away or the queen will kill him too. And he says, and you must remember that I did not kill anybody. The queen asked it of me. I was like, this is a weird scene. And then I forgot all about him, and it doesn't pay off until towards the end of the movie. I was like, oh wait, that was that guy from that other scene. I appreciate that they tried to set things up better than Sleeping Beauty did. They didn't do it well, but they tried. So
Yeah, that was a definite kudos thing. It's like, you know what? Again, there was an attempt made. Even though it wasn't a great attempt, you did try.
yeah. I feel like all of these criticisms are things that they could have fixed in, like, if they'd done rewrites of the script. Because I'm sure they had a very limited window of time that they could do this. So
Oh, yeah.
this probably could have been fixed in a rewrite or two, but doesn't matter. It's the asylum. We get what we get.
Yeah.
So then the queen has her huntsman fed to her dogs, and the dogs start messily devouring him, complete with plastic CGI blood flying up from just off camera. And he doesn't make any noise as they eat him, but then we cut to a far off shot from somewhere else in the kingdom and he screams.
As you do.
A very delayed reaction to be being devoured. So then the queen, I guess, has a new henchman, and she tells him to go find the elves and ask where Snow White is, but you don't need to ask nicely. And then she pushes him onto a bed, and the camera fades to black. And again, I was like, who is this made for? Because like this also like this not in any way as egregious as Sleeping Beauty, but there were just a few scenes like this where it's like, okay, it feels like you're going for a family friendly movie, but then you've got a guy being eaten alive, and then the queen pushes the guy into a bed. And it fades to black immediately, but it seems like they're implying something here. Like, okay, whatever. And then we get a shot of a group of people. I think they were elves, like marching through the forest. But it looks like they only shot like three of them and then doubled and tripled them up so it makes it look like a big group.
Oh, 100%.
And then I think it's Orlando again, comes back in, and he tells them that the queen's men are all over the forest. And they figure if the queen wants her dead, then she'd come after them as well. So they need to hide Snow White and make sure no one knows she's there. And then they go out and they make the half elf stay behind with Snow White. And I was like, these elves are not Tolkien elves because they get ambushed way too quickly. The one guy is like wandering around looking at the ground, and like a human sneaks up from him from like so far back. It was like if this was a Tolkien elf, they would have heard him a mile away and shot him before he even noticed they were there. But then I think Orlando and Mara, like I don't know how much they decide, but they know that they're going to start a war because they kill the attackers. One of them with an arrow and the other with a magical CGI chasm that they open with their amulets. And while they're out doing this, Snow White wakes up and she tries to talk to the half human, half elf guy that everyone calls Runt. And this is where you learn his name is Hagthorn.
Right.
And then he has bizarre reactions to things. She asks where she is, so she doesn't remember anything, and then he's all mad. Like he gets mad at her for some reason and tells her to leave him alone. And he's stuck there. He should be out warning people about the queen's guards, and he leaves. And now she's wondering what the queen's doing, so she goes after him. And somehow he has fully disappeared in the 15 seconds that it took her to cross the room and go outside. She calls for him, he doesn't respond, so she says she must go now and runs off into the forest. And like at this point I was like, I was kind of feeling sorry for the half elf guy when Orlando was picking on him, but now I'm thinking Orlando had a point. This guy is useless. And then at some point in here, the queen tells the guards to unleash the dogs because they can't find her. And then they just let all the dogs loose. And if for some reason they just don't eat anybody on their way out. I was like, can the queen control the dogs? Or is this just a plot convenience? Because it doesn't ever show the queen like manipulating the dogs. They just do what she wants. I was like, it does not matter. But I just thought it was weird.
But it's still a thing, yeah.
Yeah, they go straight for Snow White. They like immediately find her. It just seemed odd. It was very convenient. But it was also funny because they find her immediately, but then they stop and just start menacingly approaching her, giving the prince plenty of time to see what's happening and throw rocks at them.
As you do. You know what? You gotta make sure that it's known.
Make sure that they can stop menacingly approach Snow White and start menacingly approach you instead.
Exactly.
So that you can lop off one of their CGI heads.
And it is so silly.
It looks like it looks like plastic meat. It's not done well at all.
No, it looks atrocious.
But then it's like there's an earthquake or something, and they all run away. But apparently, it was actually one of those lizard things. And then the prince is like looking around, confused, and then it's suddenly right there. Like, okay, whatever. But meanwhile, while the prince is like distracting all the animals, Hagthorn has found Snow White and helps her escape. And this distracts the beast long enough for the prince to somehow make its way onto his head. And then he like stabs it over and over and over until the head falls off. And the prince hits the ground unconscious, but in a perfectly clean and pressed attire. It's like not a lick of blood or dirt to be seen on these clothes.
That's just how the prince operates.
I guess so.
Also, I think it was this scene. I could be mistaken. At one point, the prince goes up against a dragon, and Snow White is on the other side of the dragon. I think that was the one you just described. I can't keep them straight, but
Probably.
Like they're on opposite sides of this dragon. Regardless, the dragon is quite large, but how do you not see the princess or see Snow White there. Like the way that it's shot is so discombobulated. There's no way to tell where they are in regards to each other. And obviously, it was maybe shot at different times. But the way that it's shot, it's like, okay, are they both in the same place or are they not? And it's like they're right across the way from each other. The way that it's set up, it's so ridiculous.
Yeah, it wasn't shot well, but I think it was because of the budget. Because to shoot it well would have required them to build something for him to believably ride this thing with her in the shot at the same time. And they couldn't do that because, like, when he's riding it, he's CGI. And
Yeah,
when it's an up close on him stabbing, you don't see the dragon below him. He's just stabbing off screen.
that's fair.
So I think it's a budget thing.
But the thing is, even with that, like, right, it very well could be, but you could write yourself not into that corner. You could have, they could have changed the scenario where, he fought the dragon and then, she, makes her way by and maybe he's under the brush or something and, he sees what he thinks is her, but he can't tell and she doesn't see him or something. There's other
It was
scenarios.
it, it was not very clear as to who saw who and what they noticed and whatever because like he acts like he saw her, but then the queen later is like gaslighting him and like, oh, you're just imagining things. It's the same thing with me and my husband. I see him around. But like, then I was also like, well, why didn't Snow White see the prince? Like it was not super clear.
Yeah, it's very strange. Which again, it's a small in the grand scheme, it's a small thing, but it's still a thing. And
Well, at this point, he thinks he has seen her because after this, he goes to the house where she was hiding and asks if they have seen a girl with a runt-sized elf. And then I was like, how can you tell it was? They're all the same except some have pointier ears than others.
and some are better applied ears than others.
Yeah, really. And then he thinks he sees her and he goes after her, but it's just an elf that looks like her from behind. And I don't think that was supposed to be funny, but it was kind of funny.
Oh, all that stuff is funny, regardless of what is meant or not meant by it.
Yeah. But once he's gone, they pull Snow White out because apparently they had her tied up and hidden behind some boards. But then they free her as soon as he's gone. They're not very consistent as to whether or not they think she's a threat. Because like they untie her immediately, and then they start discussing what they're going to do. So they must not see her as a threat because they untie her and then they start talking about their plans.
Right.
Because Orlando wants to go amass an army to fight the queen, and the others don't want to because their numbers have dwindled too far. And then he's like, the dark elves were right. We should have never trusted the humans. We should have remained isolated as they have. And I was like, what? Dark elves? Guess who's going to be the Deus Ex Machina towards the end?
What? No, that's crazy. I don't know what you're talking about. This movie is perfectly balanced. I don't know how you could come to that thing.
Yeah, okay. Snow White is. They're talking about the prince like he's in league with the queen, and Snow White is like, I'm sure there's just been a misunderstanding. He would never do all these bad things that you think he did. I'll just go talk to him. I can clear this up. And I was like, I mean, it's true. Like the queen and the prince are not technically in league with each other, but how does she know this?
Right.
She's literally had one conversation with him.
Exactly. And otherwise, I mean, so here's the thing. I think the fact that she was in a convent does sort of like that virtuous nature. I think they're
Yeah,
probably trying to highlight that aspect, like the faith in humanity and all that good stuff.
that is true. I think they probably could have shown that a bit better to make it make more sense. But that does make sense.
That was my thought, but I don't know.
So they let her go talk to the prince, but they're like, it's a dangerous mission. I wouldn't even ask it of an elf. But then Hagthorn is like, I'll go with her. So so they go out, and Orlando also leaves to go talk to the dark elves, who are just regular elves, but they have darker clothes and makeup. And they speak a language that the subtitles identify as Elvish, but I would be curious to know if that was an actual language. I wasn't like it felt like it was an actual language. It didn't feel like they were making up gibberish, but I don't know.
It's possible. I mean, if it's just a few lines, you could probably come up with something. But
Yeah.
yeah, if it's a whole conversation, then yeah, especially to keep it consistent.
I think a lot of the conversation is more implied than this because you cut away and you see that Mara is watching them back home through a bowl of green liquid, which I'm wondering if that's supposed to be the same thing as the magic mirror. I don't know.
I would assume it's probably based on the same stuff.
Yeah, it probably is. But anyway, she's watching this conversation and she says, "They refuse to go to war. Only the prince can save us now." So then you have Snow White and Hagthorn trying to sneak into the castle, but he gets caught and she escapes. And she goes back to the other elves and they're blaming her. And she says that they could try and talk to the queen's servant elf to see if she could be their spy inside the castle. And the other elves don't want to trust her because she's on the queen's side or something like that. I'm like, isn't she basically a slave? Like the narration at the beginning pretty much said that they were being forced to work for the humans.
Yeah. I would imagine too that that probably like you have even if you're held against your will, like you still have that loyalty to her just because if you don't, you could easily be, beaten or
Which I think is implied later because, well, we'll get there. I think it's
yeah,
implied later that she's doing what she's doing because she thinks the queen is going to kill her or something.
I would agree.
Anyway, Orlando says that they can try this. They can go with Snow White's plan. And then again, I was like, maybe Orlando is the only elf that has any sense. Because,
Well,
like,
he
this
is the
is a good
leader,
plan.
so in
Yeah.
theory, you'd hope so.
I was like, I'm sorry, Orlando, for thinking you were just a bigot against the other half elves. Like, maybe he is still a bit of a bigot, but
Right,
at least
right.
he has some sense here.
Yeah. Well, someone has to, and being that he's their leader, you would hope that, the leader would have some kind of good solid sense, but
Yeah. So then back at the castle, Hagthorn is chained up in the dungeon, and the queen uses her magic on him to get him to reveal where Snow White is. And then she has her elf servant make a magic ring that will make her sleep forever if she puts it on her finger. I was like, is there any other version that has a ring? Because I looked it up in the Grimm's version. There's no ring. You
oh,
have you have the belt, you have the comb, you have the apple, and those are the three that I always know about from other stories.
mhm,
I don't remember a ring,
interesting.
so it was an interesting choice to do a ring and nothing else.
Yeah.
When they first started, I was like, okay, they're going to start with the ring and then they'll move up. But then the ring was the only thing she tried.
Yeah. I don't know.
You didn't even have the classic apple.
Yeah. I suppose maybe to keep it separate from everything else, like they did with the elves and the dwarves. I mean, that whole
Yeah,
thing was a thing.
it's not important. I just thought it was
No.
interesting that they chose a ring.
It very much so, yeah. Well, maybe the ring was because of the ring that she thought, like the fact
Yeah,
that
because she tricks her with the ring, like she has her change it into the other ring so that she'll take it.
yeah. But even with that, it was more like she kept bugging her and was like, okay, I'll take the ring, just don't look at me because she was so hideous.
Yeah, and the transformation is done through this elf. And again, this is like, why does the queen trust this elf so much? Because the queen asks her to turn her into a crone. And like, if I were an all-powerful magic elf and my captor asked me to do some kind of a transformation spell on her, she'd be getting transmorphed into a beetle and I'd step on her. The queen has way too much trust in this elf.
No, agreed. I do think it just goes with that classic idea of, this elf is under the power, like, for whether via, loyalty or because of threats or whatever else.
Yeah.
I think that's more what it comes down to, really.
Yeah. She does seem very timid because you have the scene later where they're trying to get to her and then she's like calling for the queen and saying she's loyal to the queen. But I think it's because the queen was like right there.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And also, what was up with Snow White's costume? Like her disguise was like she looked like she was a 1900s newsboy.
That or she was like a 2022 model of some sort with that hat.
It was like it was like a suit jacket too. It was
Yeah.
so weird. It was nothing period correct on that. It was
No.
bizarre.
Yeah, it was like what she would wear to come in and get prepared for the day.
Yeah, it was so strange. Like
Yeah. No,
I like that they did it because it was hilarious and made it's just it made me laugh. I was like, what is this?
it
But like
was quite out of left field.
yeah, it's like they put this costume on her, but like it didn't matter at all because the queen is like watching her from the bushes. It's like,
Right.
okay, what was the point of the costume? I don't know. It doesn't matter. Whatever. Moving on.
You can ask, but you're not going to get an answer.
Nope. But yeah, anyways, the queen crone pops up, offers Snow White a ring, and then this is where we get the reveal of her crone makeup. And I honestly figured with as small of a budget as they had, they were just going to get a second actress who was like 90 years old to play the crone. But no, they like covered her in like paper mache and ashes or something. Looked like she had a thin layer of cement all over her face.
Yeah, it probably took them 2 days to get it off when all was said and done.
It was weird. Like, it was fine, but it seemed like a strange choice for the crone.
Yeah.
But she takes the ring, puts it on, falls asleep, and the elves take her away. And meanwhile, the prince, like I said, he's basically been gaslit by the queen into believing he's seeing visions of Snow White. He now believes that she's actually dead, and he's basically resigned himself to the fate of marrying the queen until he later sees his ring on the finger of Wally, the guy from earlier in the movie, and it turns out he's the son of the huntsman. I was like, it's so nice of them to explain that earlier in the movie. And Wally tells him that his father never killed anyone. So that means Snow White is still alive, so he rides away immediately to find her. Just in time to get the elves to stop cremating her. But no glass coffin for this version, they're just going to burn her.
Oh, they didn't have the budget, you know.
And then he takes the ring from the queen off her hand, puts his on, and kisses her hand, and then she wakes up.
Hooray! And that's where this movie should have ended.
We've got a long way to go.
Oh, I know.
So now the prince wants to fight the queen, and he says the queen has many enemies across all the kingdoms. If everybody comes together, they can defeat her. And he says they need to do it now while she thinks he's still on her side. And the one elf tells him to be careful because the queen has ways of enchanting men to do what she wants. And this is where Snow White says, as she did with my father. And I was like, you knew from the beginning? You're going to let her ship you off to a convent? You knew that she was bewitching people? Whatever.
And that could have been something found out later, but we're never given anything that indicates that.
Yeah. If that is something that she learned in the timeline of this movie, they should have shown that.
Yeah.
But the prince says that she won't be able to enchant him because he only has eyes for one.
So says every guy in the history of guys.
I mean, I guess in this case it was true, but like, why is it true for him? Like, why can't she enchant him? Like, why is the power? Doesn't matter. Whatever. It's a fairy tale. I shouldn't be asking these questions.
But it's hard not to.
I know.
It is still the thing, you know?
But before he leaves, he proposes. So now they're engaged. And then after he's gone, Snow White goes to talk with the healer elf, Mara, who basically implies that Snow White is the luminary from the prophecy. And I was like, well, duh. But also, how did Mara know this? Whatever, doesn't matter.
Right, and you know, we had this thing from however far back, and now it's reemerging.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
20 minutes before the end of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. So then the prince goes back and he tells his servant that he's going to destroy the queen. And they barely talk, but the servant basically knows everything that he has planned, and he's going to go visit all the kingdoms, get everyone together to fight. And at first I was like, okay, did they telepathically communicate this information? You know, it was way too much about all of this. Except it turns out the servant has been in league with the queen this whole time. And I was like, was he just recently enchanted, or was this their evil plan from the beginning? And then I started remembering all the scenes where the guy was like, oh, she didn't fully turn you down. And then he's like trying to convince him later, like, this is the best thing to do. He was like really pushing for this marriage hard. So maybe he fooled me. Like, they didn't do it well, but they tried. So I guess a score 1 for them. Because it surprised me. And thinking back, I was like, okay, this does make sense. It doesn't make enough sense, but it makes just enough that, okay, fine.
It's a starting place.
Yeah.
It's not a great starting place, but it's a starting place.
So now the prince is captured. He's in the dungeon hanging in chains next to Hagthorn. And the queen, I guess, is planning to like bring a priest down to marry him in the dungeon the next day. And Hagthorn warns him about her magic, and he acts like it's not going to work. But then she seems to use it successfully on him, and he appears to be enchanted into being willing to marry her. And then it's like they start making out, but it's less them making out and more like he's kissing all over her neck until the servant fairy or servant elf walks in and to tell her that the queen that her army's waiting for her. And the look of the servant's face was like, what the heck is going on in here? And I don't know if
Just
this
need a
was,
minute, I can come back.
yeah, I don't know if this was like the last straw or whatever, but this is the point where she finally decides to leave because she runs away to warn all the other elves, and they say they have no choice but to go and fight by themselves. And at this point, I was thinking, I'm just waiting for that dark elf ex machina. And then, like, right on cue, as I was thinking that, we get a shot of a dark elf looking out over the land to the White Vale Castle. And then we cut back to the castle, and the prince spits out a key to their shackles. I was like, what? Was the key was like, was that why he was kissing her neck? Was he like sucking the key off of her neck? But was the key
Yes.
not on a chain? And did she not feel him sucking up the key? This is a giant key. This is a big key.
He's got a magic tongue.
It's like, okay, whatever. Does not matter. But I like that he spit it out, and then Hagthorn is very conveniently wearing toe shoes, so he's able to pick up the key and pick the lock with his feet. And then they free all the prisoners, and now they have a prisoner army to go help in the fight.
Hooray!
But I was also thinking these prisoners aren't going to be that much use because who knows how long they've been hanging by their arms.
Right. And how malnourished are they?
Yeah, exactly. So the queen and her army are like approaching the elves. There's like 10 elves, maybe. And she tells them to unleash the dogs. And there's like 20 dogs. I swear there's more dogs in every scene that they appear in each time. Like these dogs are multiplying.
So you're saying they're like rabbits?
I don't know, but there's more of them than there's ever been. There's like an army of these dogs. But then the elves are like, they're easily picking them off. Super easy, barely an inconvenience. All it takes is like one arrow apiece to fell each of them. And then I guess maybe they run out of arrows because then they all grab their amulets and then open another magic chasm that half the dogs just seem to like leap into on purpose. And then the queen tells her army to decimate all of them except for Snow White. Leave her to me. And then they're all fighting and the elves are losing. And just as I predicted, the dark elves show up spinning and flipping through the trees like magical ninjas. It was so weirdly hilarious to me. And at some point in here, the prince and his prisoner army show up as well. And then the queen says to summon the priest. And I was like, is she planning to force him to marry her mid-battle?
Yes.
And then he gets stabbed in the back. And it looks like Hagthorn is killed too, except they never actually show the killing blow. They like frame the camera so it looks like there's a spear sticking out of him, but you never actually see it. And I was like, so many people may be dying, but they never actually show any killing blows. So I was never sure who was actually dying for real, except for the prince, because you actually heard a squirting splat noise when the thing was like stabbing behind him. So I was like, okay, well, he's actually dying for real.
So this thing actually kind of ends the same way that Sleeping Beauty ends. Like the prince is stabbed trying to save his lady.
Oh, yeah, kind of. I didn't even think of that, but there is some similarities in that.
Yeah.
The more elf magic in this than the previous one, but yeah.
True. Well, the other one didn't have any elf magic, so any elf magic is
Yes.
more than what was previous.
Yeah, the other one had fairy magic.
But yeah, fair point.
But also during all of this, you have like another mini battle for the flame happening elsewhere because the queen had sent 3 guys up after the flame. Because I guess she figured out where it was, even though you never saw her figuring it out. She just somehow now she knows where it is. Whatever, doesn't matter. One guy is killed by a lizard, and then another guy is killed by the guy who's guarding the flame. And then the last one is having a whole sword fight through all of these other scenes with the battle. Like a long time passes in the other battle, and these 2 guys are still going at it from when the queen says to go summon the priest to when the priest finally shows up to marry the dying prince off to the queen. Like they're sword fighting through this whole thing. Like, okay, they have some good stamina.
They have some great stamina.
And as I thought, Hagthorn isn't actually dead. While the queen is trying to marry the prince, he gets up and he's freeing Snow White, and she goes to the queen and she's like, you. And she's like, yes, me. And they draw their swords in slow motion, and the queen barely does anything as Snow White cuts off her head, which turns from like a plastic mannequin looking fake head to a really fake looking CGI head that bears absolutely no resemblance to the queen whatsoever.
Oh, it's terrible. It's so bad.
And then Snow White like declares herself the queen of White Vale, and the queen's head turns to stone for some reason. I, I was whatever. I'm confused, but it does not matter. Whatever.
You're trying. That's all that matters.
Yeah. And then we cut back to the other sword fight, and the queen's guard just gives up. I think we're supposed to infer that he like was under a spell, and now the spell is broken. But it wasn't super clear. But I think that's what happened.
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine.
And so now the queen is dead, but so is the prince, except Snow White is like crying over his body, and then all the elves gather around and Deus Ex Machina him back to life. I think that's basically the end. They go home.
Yeah.
There's like a quick scene of them like returning, and then there's like the flame. Like, yeah, that's basically the end. There's not a whole lot. They don't do a now they're married and have a baby thing like the previous one did.
That's preferable, if we're being honest.
Yeah, kind of.
Like, not that they shouldn't be happy and live happily ever after with child, but it's just like
We don't need it. We can infer it.
no, it's not necessary to the story. It doesn't really add anything. You're just padding for time.
And we definitely don't need a weird random cliffhanger where the exact same thing happens to this baby as happened to the previous baby.
Or just a child named Day.
Yeah.
You know?
Nobody needs a child named Day.
Dave is fine. Dawn is okay. But yeah, not Day.
No offense to anyone who might actually be named Day that might perchance be listening to this podcast, which seems unlikely,
Right.
but is not completely impossible.
Exactly. Sky is okay too. We can work with Sky. We can work with other weather condition names, Stormy, Rainbow, Raindrop, whatever, but not Day.
Yeah, that's Grimm's Snow White.
Yes, though it was a little grim. Let's get that out there. I did find it interesting in one of my notes that I didn't mention, and it's a small thing. But it's a movie. It's one of those mistakes, but it's such a big mistake. I look at it and go, oh my god. So when Snow White is first taken out by the huntsman, she's like he takes the ring off of her finger, and then it cuts back to a shot of her, and the ring is clearly on her finger. So I was like, did he take it? Did he just kind of kind of play with it? What's going on? So then later on, you see him like give the ring to his son, and it's just like, what? That ring is so important. How do you not, tighten up your shot so you can't see her hand or something?
Yeah, I didn't notice, but that does not surprise me at all.
No, me neither. But yeah, well, what do you think about this one?
Part of me feels like I liked it better than Sleeping Beauty, like as a whole complete experience. But
Hmm.
I mean, that's not saying a whole lot because neither one of them were that great.
No.
But like if someone said to me, we have to watch one of these, I think I would pick this one.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I feel like I liked this one just slightly better than Sleeping Beauty.
The world is definitely wider.
And I feel like they made me like the characters more. Like I feel like they put more effort into making them just a little bit more believable and giving them a little bit more character growth. Whereas the other movie, they were mostly one-dimensional stereotypes. Like really the only person that I liked watching was the evil queen, but that was not because of her character or anything. I think I just liked the actress.
Yeah. No, I get you. I think that's a really good way of looking at it. I would agree. It's definitely more story, even if it's a little bit more convoluted. There's more to kind of think about, and the plot issues don't feel as significant
Mm.
as they did with Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah, and with this one, like the plot issues that I had, like with the thing with the kings, I mean the princes, whatever, the guy who's like the prince's, I don't know what his title would be. Like he helped the prince, but then it turned out he was in league with the queen.
Right, it was her servant or his servant or whatever.
Like even though that seemed to come out of nowhere, like I said, thinking back, it did seem like they were trying to set it up. They didn't do it well enough that it was obvious what they were doing, but I liked that it was a surprise, but it also made sense in hindsight. Where
Very
whereas like in the other movie, like something would just randomly come out of nowhere and I'd be like, "Wait, what? What?"
Yeah.
So I feel like they did not a much better job, but enough of a better job that it made it feel like a better put together movie.
Yeah, I would agree. I will say though, having watched both of these back to back, like when you're talking about the stone, like the queen's head becoming stone, I could have sworn that that was in Sleeping Beauty, which it wasn't, but
No, she just got stabbed and fell over and died.
yeah. Like, but just bits like that, like that they kind of run into each other. And maybe, you're talking about two fairy tale movies. You both have characters that fall asleep at one point. What happens to the princess is kind of on the same page. There are some distinct things that do stand out, like big things that stand out that are the same between the two of them. So I'm gonna say that's more just my head and not the movies themselves.
Yeah. I don't know. They're both similar quality.
Yeah. Which, you're talking Asylum movies 2 years apart.
Yeah.
They're not going to be radically different, just given they probably have a base template script and they kind of build on it from there, or like a list of things. Okay, we can do this, we can do that, to kind of move scripting along and keep things on task.
Yeah. But for the most part, I think I like this one slightly better. And if I have to recommend one of them, I think I would recommend this one. But if you like good, bad movies, yeah, watch both.
Yeah, they're not bad by any stretch. I mean, and
They're bad,
you don't have
they're
to pay
bad in
for
the
them.
way that it's not a bad experience to watch.
Yeah, and like I guess the one thing I would say for Sleeping Beauty, which I think I said before, that one felt quicker than this one did. Like this
It
one
did, yeah.
felt a fair amount longer.
It did for me too, and part of that I think is because uh, I can't stop myself. I take extremely detailed notes, so I always have to pause as I'm going. And this had so many plot points that I wanted to make sure I remembered, so I paused this one a lot more than I did Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah.
So it it felt longer for that reason alone. It was slightly longer, but I think if I watched them without pausing, this would still feel a little bit longer. But they packed a lot more into this movie than Sleeping Beauty did.
They very much did. But for all of that, I feel like the plot moved a little slower too.
Kind of, but there was also more than one plot happening because you had the
Yeah.
whole thing with the elves, you had the thing that was the Snow White myth, you had some stuff going on with the prince that they were adding, there was all the monsters, and there was just a lot packed into this.
No, you're right. 100%. So,
But yeah, I guess that's all that we have to say about Grimm's Snow White.
I mean, the one other thing I would add would be to say that the one nice thing about these two is, and a good chunk of other versions of Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, that most of them are on Tubi, and you have to deal with commercial breaks, but there aren't that many, and it is a free service.
Yeah,
You're gonna get, I mean, as long as you don't mind the time aspect, you're not out anything going to check them out there. So
yeah, Tubi has a surprisingly large library.
they do very much. And it's pretty diverse, really.
Yeah, it's a great place to go for good bad movies. I've like
Oh
in
yeah.
looking to when I was trying to figure out where I could watch these, I came across a whole bunch of other things that were on here that was like, okay, I need to add this to my list, I need to add this to my list. There were versions of Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, and Cinderella that I had never heard of before I saw them on Tubi. So it's a good place to go for something random to watch because they don't have a lot of mainstream stuff, but they have a lot of stuff. So
They do, if you go and look under, they're kind of gaining more new stuff, like what's the movie? Knives Out. There's a fair amount of mainstream horror on there, as long as you're not looking at it around Halloween. There was some other stuff too that was pretty mainstream that I was surprised by. But yeah, I mean, it's a crapshoot. It's always kind of coming and going. So if you check something out, see it there, and then go back and you don't see it, more than likely it'll be there sometime again soon. So
yeah, this was not sponsored by Tubi.
yeah. But it was our main source of finding things. So
True. I mean, if they want to sponsor me, we'll do more Tubi stuff.
absolutely.
There's plenty of stuff on here that could potentially be a podcast.
Very much. You could probably do a podcast a day and still have, a ton left over.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is not the first time I found movies to watch on Tubi. There was some really bad animation from last year that I watched. Well, I guess the year before that I watched for my animation ranking podcast that was like Tubi originals. Like they were terrible, but I was kind of glad I watched them because it gave me something to add to the bottom of my ranking list. I always feel bad when I'm making a ranking list, putting something that's just okay at the bottom Because, like, I feel like the bottom needs to be the worst, like, actual bad. So I was glad that Tubi had some actual bad stuff to watch. Like, it was,
Yeah.
they were really dumb. The one was like called like Pastaka Apocalypse or something. It was like alien pasta attacking the world, but it was like really gory and stupid. It was really dumb. It was, and that wasn't even the bottom of my list. What was the one that was at the bottom of my list? I think it was called Millennial Hunter. It was about this like a Gen X or Boomer guy who hates millennials, so he's going to go and kill them all. It was the dumbest movie, but I was glad to have a worst movie to add to the list.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's the thing with the Tubi originals. Most of them are pretty bottom of the barrel, but occasionally you do run across a couple that are really fantastic. I've run across a few that I loved, that were either bought by Tubi or produced by them. So
Yeah.
I guess keep your mind open when you're going in, but yeah. With the addendum that a good chunk of them, the bar is set pretty low for a lot of Tubi stuff, so.
I mean, that's fine. We got to have somebody producing the good, bad stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, and like I say, there have been their quality has gotten better. Genuinely. Like they've produced some of my favorite movies of last year too. So, which regarded my favorite movies are my bar is not typical by any stretch, but
I should look and see if they've made any new animation for 2024, if I get around to doing another animation ranking, because I need some more. Maybe I'd find a hidden gem, but I feel like I need some bad stuff to add to the bottom of my list.
yeah, well, it's a good place to start. So,
Well, I think we probably can call this one good. I'm sure we will be back for more in the future. I think we'll probably need to talk about Snow White and the Huntsman at some point, as well as whatever the sequel was that I don't remember the name of.
it was Winter War
Okay.
or something
Something
like
like
that.
that.
Yeah, it's like how do you? I mean, I suppose as long as Snow White is part of it, you can still have her in there or whatever. So
Yeah. I don't know. We'll find out.
we will.
Well, until then, do you want to let people know where they can find you if they'd like more from you?
You can find me here on YouTube at Trivial Theater. I do quite a wide array of random, obscure, and straight up bad movies. I did Slay as well as Vegas in Space, and I'm hopefully going to keep up a pretty consistent schedule of spots or of videos. So stop by and say hi.
Okay. Well, we will see you soon for some other fairy tale.
That's right. Ha ha!
Thanks for listening to Every Version Ever. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and follow my co-hosts as well. My Linktree and all of our links will be in the description below. If you want more of my content, all my podcasts are available on YouTube as well as most podcast platforms. If you enjoyed this show, check out one of the other podcasts or check out my Patreon for bonus and extended episodes you won't find anywhere else. We'll be back soon with another brand new episode, so thanks for listening and we'll see you next time.